good, Steve.
God has a sense of humor.
That's why I religious. I made him a deal. If he did part of the announcements, he would have to read all those names for the last 20-some verses. Memorial Day. As I reach each Memorial Day, I remember back when I was a senior in high school, one of the greatest honors I had was when our color guard in the high school, which I helped begin, I was a color sergeant, was asked to lead the parade through downtown Troy. The VFW color guard, they moved to the back, they moved us to the front. It was quite an honor to march the entire town leading that. So some little name to fame, so to speak. The Civil War, you all know, ended in 1865, right? The last shot wasn't fired until 1997. Yeah, figure that one out. It turns out in 1997, two young boys were playing around with a brand new Christmas present, a metal detector. Using their new toy, they came across a live shell dating back to the Civil War. The boys were Michael and Andrew Zimmerman of Winchester, Virginia. They didn't know what the shell was at first, neither did their uncle, Matthew Robinson. He reports poking it and banging it and doing all kinds of stuff and examining it, but fortunately, Robinson called the police to inspect their new find. The police recognized the strange object right off as an ancient ammunition shell. It exploded in Robinson's backyard. This is no small shell, for it left a crater that measured 4 foot long and 5 foot wide. Robinson commented, "In a way, it's the last shot fired in a Civil War. So we're glad they blew it up in our yard." The Civil War on one last night. It's amazing that 132 years after the end of a war, its weapons could still be alive and capable of destruction. Yet that seems to be the nature of war. Its effects linger on the lives of a people and a nation for many generations. As the children of Afghanistan, many of them have been maimed or killed by millions of landmines left behind from a terrible legacy of war. Even in a forward-thinking nation like ours, where history seems to matter less than progress, we set aside at least one day each year to acknowledge the influence of our wars and those who fought. Many of you remember when this day was referred to as Decoration Day. Remember that? But I wonder how many actually know when the first actual Decoration Day took place. Anybody know? It took place in Charleston, South Carolina on May 1st, 1865. David W. Blight, a professor of American history at Yale University and director of the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition, in doing some research, discovered the first Decoration Day. It happened at 9 a.m. on May 1st, 1865, when a procession of 10,000 people stepped off, led by 3,000 black school children, carried armloads of roses singing John Brown's body. The children were followed by several hundred black women with baskets of flowers, wreaths, and crosses. Then came black men marching in cadence, followed by contingents of Union, infantry, and other black and white citizens. As many as possible gathering in the cemetery enclosure, and the children sang, "We'll rally round the flag" in a Star-Spangled Banner. And several spirituals before the black ministers read the scripture. There's no records that survives of which the biblical passages read were covered. But the spirit of Leviticus 25 was surely present at those burial rites. "For it is a jubilee, it shall be holy unto you. And in the year of this jubilee we shall return every man unto his own possession." Now officially, as a national holiday, it was John A. Logan, a former federal general, who called for the first day of remembrance on May 30th, 1868. School children were asked to spread flower petals upon the graves of war dead. Since that time, the day has been changed to the last Monday in May. And the concept has been expanded to include, remember, America's war dead that sustained conflicts in all wars. But have you ever wondered why Memorial Day is marked in May? Its date doesn't recall some historic battle or the start of some war or the starting or signing of some armistice. You ever wonder why it's done in May? Any thought? Well, it's for a very practical reason. Because it's the time when flowers blossom. Flowers which are used to decorate graves. Memorial Day is primarily a national holiday in which we remember and honor men and women who have given their lives for our country. In the words of Abraham Lincoln, it is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. It is fitting and proper for us to observe Memorial Day not only for Americans, but also as Christians. There should be no conflict between our loyalty to our God and our loyalty to our country. These loyalties reinforce each other. For God has not set us to live our lives in isolation or privacy, but within the framework of living which He has appointed. The life which He gave us has an inescapable membership character to it. And by divine appointment, we are members of a home, of a community, and of a nation. Just as to be Christian is to be a member of the Christian church. To live as God intended us to live, we must fulfill our obligations in each of these spheres. Eric Rich stated, in many towns and villages, Memorial Day is known as Decoration Day. It sets off the imagery of freedom and democracy. Yes, Memorial Day, fireworks, high school bands, and marching in parades decked out in colorful uniforms, in unison down Main Street playing John Philip Sousa music. There are speakers and politicians everywhere, flowers on graves, flags unfurled, flapping in the air, family picnics, fried chicken, softball games, joy, laughter, tears. This is the observance and visual side of Memorial Day. He goes on to say, I see a gray-haired woman with a scarf around her head, an old skirt, and worn-out sneakers, kneeling by a graveside with tears running down her cheeks. She's still mourning the loss of her sons in a war in a foreign land thousands of miles away. She wears the medals on her tattered blouse, the medals given her by a thankful nation for the lives her sons sacrificed. The blouse is tattered, but it was a blouse that she wore on the day that her sons went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. She talks to the crosses herself and slowly walks back to the car to go home, where she works in the yard all day with her flowers. These are the flowers that are periodically placed on the graves of her sons. Her husband reads the newspaper all day. He hurts too much to go anywhere that day. Freedom also can be as quiet as a whisper inside a cabin door in 1863. Mr. Lincoln said we're free. You know, our past is vital. It provides identity and the dreams that have guided us individually as a nation, as a faith community. Like our cemeteries this weekend, and I saw lots of people out here. You know, we remember when cemeteries were filled with people kneeling to plant a flower, or place a garland, or unfurl a flag, or even say a prayer at the graves. Y'all remember those days? They're gone today. Some still do it, but not as many. Most people can no longer be bothered by it. It takes time away from their beach or the backyard or the the barbecue or the ballpark. In fact, in a national cemetery on Long Island, one of the nation's largest, it's become necessary to advertise in a newspaper for volunteers to place flags on the graves of veterans. The number of volunteers have dwindled over the years. However, many of those volunteers have no idea why they're doing it. In fact, one young man, a 13-year-old Boy Scout, was asked if he understood why the members of his Boy Scout troop were placing flags on the graves. He quickly replied, "To get service hours." Memorial Day is obviously not one of our major holidays, but we need to remember. We need to remember the debt we owe to others. To honor their sacrifice is not to glorify war. War is the ultimate blasphemy against God. Still, we live in a cruel world where tyrants would impose their will on others. It'd be nice if we could live in a world where people always played by the rules, where no one covered their neighbor's property, where never again would we have to depend upon our military might to enforce justice. But as you know, reading the news, that world doesn't exist yet. We do know the dangers lie ahead, and we just wait for it. Winston Churchill used to tell a parable about a zoo in which all the animals decided to disarm. They arranged peace talks to work out details. Rhinoceros asked for a strict ban against the use of teeth in war. The stag and a porcupine agreed. The lion and tiger defended teeth as an honorable weapon. The bear, however, wanted both teeth and horns to be banned, but suggested that all the animals be allowed to give each other a good, strong hug when they quarreled. This may serve to offend all the other animals, and so they can never agree. Sounds like some of the talks our politicians are having with other people, doesn't it? But that's the kind of world we live in today. And thus through the centuries, young men, and sometimes young women, have been sacrificed to the cause of one noble ideal after another. Some of these wars have been senseless and barbaric, to be sure, but others have been necessary. We honor the memory this day of those who have given their lives believing that they are making the world safer, freer, and more humane. But what is the spirit in which we are to observe Memorial Day? A touching little story from the Old Testament illustrates the right spirit. Here we have King David, weary and spent after a hard battle with his enemies, the Philistines. He takes refuge in a cave near his native town of Bethlehem, spurred by memories of his boyhood, but knowing that the town is occupied by the enemy, he's therefore longing for the impossible. The king exclaims, "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." Hardly had those words actually left his lips, and three of his heroic soldiers break through the enemy lines. They draw water from that well in Bethlehem, and they bring it to their king to drink. David receives that vessel in his hands, but it says he would not drink it. He poured it out to the Lord and said, "Far be it from me before my God that I should drink this. Shall I drink the lifeblood of these men? For at the risk of their lives, they brought it." Bought at a price of a willingness to make so great a sacrifice, it was too costly a drink to be enjoyed selfishly. And the only use worthy of it was to pour it out as a thank offering to God. The sensitivity of sacrifices made for us and the sense of obligation to make consecrated use of the results of sacrifices constitute the right spirit for celebrating Memorial Day. No one has ever expressed this spirit more concisely and yet more eloquently than Lincoln did at Gettysburg. And three thoughts not addressed deserve to be underscored today. First, the appreciation of a great heritage. Our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. The land which the fathers of this nation have bequeathed to us is a land of liberty and equality. The flag which they lifted over it is a flag which stands for freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and of worship. It represents the right of every citizen, not just those we want to, but every citizen, to enjoy the freedoms and equal opportunity to make the most of his God-given capacities. The fathers accept this liberty and equality as a sacred trust in the hand of God and taught us to praise the power that has made and preserved us a nation. Are we worthy heirs of such riches? Do we prize them so high that we constantly thank God for them? Do we appreciate the high privilege of American citizenship? And do we make responsible and constructive uses of it? Good question for this day and age. We Americans of the 21st century, who tend to take our freedom for granted, need to recover the reverent appreciation of which our fathers had, and which Lincoln said in the spirit when Finland achieved its independence. The poet wrote a stirring ode to the freedom of Finland. These lines are much better than the original poetry. But even in prose, their message comes through. It says, "You are the highest, the most longed for under heaven. In the midst of long centuries, in the stillness of the night, we have waited for you. And now, you long expected, you bride of our dreams, are here to wipe away the disgrace of slavery. We cannot weave you a garland of flowers. We cannot make it out of roses or laurels. We will lift up to your brow the crown of our people's suffering. And standing at your altar, we bow as a nation. Only over our bodies does the oppressor come near you. Only when the last man has stiffened, his last arm has stiffened, still grasping the hilt. Only when the last drop of blood has been spilled before you. It was this spirit which girded the Finnish patriots when 2 decades later they stood up bravely in defense of their freedom against an overwhelming oppressor. Today we honor Americans who have defended our freedom in the same spirit. Second thought from Lincoln is acknowledgement of the price paid for our heritage. Remember those who gave the last full measure of devotion, who gave their lives that the nation might live. Memorial Day calls us to pay respect to the brave men and women, living and dead, who have fought to preserve the nation. But in doing so, we are compelled to count the cost of our heritage in terms of the lives of fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, in terms of widows and widowers and orphans. On the long run, we appreciate most of the things for which we have paid the most. Our American way of life has been purchased at a very high price. We say thank you today to all the men and women who, like the men of David, have placed their lives in jeopardy for us. One of those who are now serving in the armed forces of our country. Remember gratefully the veterans of the wars of yesterday who responded to our country, to the country's call in an hour of danger. If we've caught the vision of Memorial Day, we see not only the parades of today, but also an otherwise invisible parade of heroes marching from Valley Forge, from Gettysburg, and all the battlefields of the present century. Soldiers whose blood has nourished the soul and the soil from which our freedom grows. When a train bearing the body of Abraham Lincoln to its final resting place stopped at a railroad station in Albany, New York, the crowds gathered to get a glimpse of this martyr president. One poor black woman lifted up her little boy above the crowd and she said, "Son, take a long look." He died for you. Just so today, we try to take a long look and view with reverent respect all those whose lives are the price of our heritage. A third thought from Lincoln is consecration of the task of preserving our heritage. The great president asked us, the living, to be dedicated to the unfinished work which he here so nobly advanced. He pleads that from the honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause of responsible freedom, that we highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, so that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. Today, at the conclusion of a disastrous war in Vietnam, we are haunted by the feeling that 56,000 American soldiers have indeed died in vain. But if this tragedy will serve to awaken us, to dedicate ourselves to the unfinished work before us, to set our house in order, to strive intelligently and responsibly to prevent the reoccurrence of such a tragedy, then the sacrifice will not have been in vain. That we shall have a new birth of freedom, and a vision which Lincoln presents in another famous address will be realized. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the light, or see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Now, of course, there are others who have given their lives for us who never wore a uniform, never even carried a gun. In Revelation 7, verses 15, it talks about those who wash their robes in the blood of the Lamb. Among these are those who have given their lives in the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And there have been hundreds of thousands of such sacrifices through the ages. In the 16th century, there was a bloody purge of Christians in Scotland. Thousands of ministers and laypersons suffered for Christ's sake. Many were hanged or slaughtered in cold blood. Some of these believers endured the torture of burning at the stake or being beheaded. Patrick Hamilton was a young Scotsman, 24 years old, when he was sentenced to die. As he was tied to the stake and a fire was burning at his feet, he pulled off his outer garments and handed them to his servants, saying, "These will not profit me in the fire, yet they will do thee some good." Hamilton, taunted by one of his persecutors to deny God, answered, "Wicked man, thou knowest I am not at guilt, and that is the truth of God for which I now suffer." As the fire burned, the young martyr called out, "How long, O Lord, shall darkness overwhelm this realm? How long wilt thou suffer thy tyranny of man?" As he was being consumed by the flames, he prayed like the biblical Stephen, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." While we remember those who have died in battle, we also need to remember committed followers of Jesus like Patrick Hamilton. They died in battle too. The battle between light and darkness. Their sacrifices remind us of how anemic our own witness for Christ sometimes is. They gave their all. We dare not forget them. Pastor William L. Stigger tells the story of a man and his congregation who served in the Navy during World War II. And one night this man was running his transport across the Atlantic when he noticed a white trail of a torpedo coming toward him. His ship was manned by hundreds of soldiers. The potential loss of life would be devastating. And nearby another smaller ship was also watching the torpedo coming. This captain of the smaller vessel maneuvered his ship between the transport and the torpedo. The explosion of his ship was unbelievable. And all those aboard died. The man who told this story ended by saying, Dr. Stigger, the skipper of that other ship, was my best friend. And so he remarked, you know, there's a verse in the Bible which has special meaning for me now. It's this. Greater love has no man than this, to lay down their life for their friends. You all might remember recently a young Army ROTC student, Riley Howell, University of North Carolina, Charlotte, took on a gunman in his classroom. His actions saved the lives of others in the class. The young man was an Officer Candidate program. He gave his all. He just recently was awarded the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star posthumously for his heroic action of putting the lives of others above his own. What kind of love gives itself up for another? What kind of love would be willing to die for you and me? It's certainly greater than any mere human love. It's a love that Jesus demonstrated to show us how much we mean to God. It's a love we celebrate today, the example of those soldiers who gave their lives for our freedom. Dr. Edward Chin writes, in India, there's a cemetery. The bodies of American soldiers are buried. Over the entrance of the cemetery, these words, tell them we gave ours today for their tomorrows. And there's one more we need to remember this day. It's the Lamb himself. The Lamb slain before the foundations of the world. J. Wilbur Chapman tells a story of a soldier who had been mortally wounded. His buddy Jim stayed by him throughout his long and lonely illness at the very end. Jim, I'm going to die, Charlie whispered to his friend. Knowing Jim had no family of his own, Charlie added, but I want you to go back to my mother and take my place. But Charlie, your mother doesn't even know me. He reminded his dying comrade. And she would not allow me to come into her home and live as a son. Charlie explained, I'll write a letter and tell her to take you in. The letter told his mother of her son's ill fortunes, of his wounds, of his suffering, and how Jim had stuck by him day and night through it all. And the letter closed like this. Mother, received Jim for my sake. Jim carefully tucked that letter into his waistcoat. After the war was over, he went to Charlie's hometown and sought the mother's house. He knocked at the door and he stood waiting, ragged and worn from the ravages of war. Very inside he carried her. And as the lady opened the door, she looked upon him and thought just another beggar looking for a handout. He was passing by. But Jim handed the letter through the half-open door. And she read it. Recognized her son's handwriting. She read that last line, Mother, received Jim for my sake. The expression on her face totally changed. Tears of deep emotion welled up inside as she opened the door, receiving Jim for Charlie's sake. According to our Bibles, that sort of acceptance is the story of the cross. God accepts us as his own beloved children for Christ's sake. We may not understand why it had to be this way, but we look at the cross and we see there an open door. And thus, we remember. Remember those who died that we might live in freedom. Remember those who died that we may live in faith. Remember Christ who died that we may live forever. That's the ultimate meaning of this Memorial Day weekend. It's a time to remember. It's a time to finish what they started. On November 18th, 1861, the Lord began to speak to a beautiful woman of hope, to a fractured American society. There's a woman by the name of Julia Ward Howe. A prominent Bostonian woman and her husband were visiting Washington, D.C. shortly after the outbreak of the Civil War. They witnessed an impressive military review one day and were on their way back to the hotel when some of the soldiers blocked their way. And to pass the time, she and her friends began to sing popular army songs, including John Brown's Body. The soldiers cheered the singing. Some of her friends suggested this is how the lyrics could be improved. As she lay waiting for dawn, the lines of a beautiful poem began to fashion themselves in her thoughts. The memory of some of the greatest lines of the Old Testament came to her mind, mingled with the faces of soldiers seated around campfires and battle trumpets recently heard. The cause of the Civil War had not been counted. The horror of the war had not been foreseen. It had not been entered upon, or had been entered with excitement, and almost a pleasurable fervor. Now the pleasurable fervor had given way to determination and a solemn acceptance of sacrifice. She got out of bed and began to write. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the Lord. And minutes later, a beautiful gospel message flowed from her pen. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, while God is marching on. It was over a year before her poem was discovered and set to a familiar tune that soldiers knew. But very quickly it was being sung in many army regiments. On one occasion, Chaplain McCabe sang it at a mass meeting in Washington. The audience joined the chorus, glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. The effect was magical as people wept and sang together. And above the applause was heard the voice of Abraham Lincoln exclaiming, while the tears unashamedly rolled down his face, sing it again. Julia Ward Howe was a beautiful Christian lady who permitted God to use her to present the gospel's hope to a troubled world. Today, God has a good word for our nation's problems. Permit him to speak it through you. Let's never forget our tomorrow. We're bought with a price. Someone had to pay with their lives, so we might be free today. There is no way we can sufficiently say thank you. The revised words of that great hymn, the Battle of the Republic, as he died to make men holy, let us live to make men free. God's truth is marching on. Please stand and join with me.